Podcast.
Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson, and today talking about just some wonderful weirdos from history. They were probably, they were called eccentrics back in the day, which eccentric, that just means autism, right? And these dudes were 1,000% autistic. And you know how I know? I'm an expert on it, all right? I was diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum a couple years ago. I paid a guy $300 who that's all he does for a living is he figures out if people are autistic or not. And he was like, yes, sir, you are there. And look, here's the thing. Like, I didn't just like wake up one day and be like, God, you know what would be funny is if I just was told I was like, no, I had spent my 20s just kind of exploring the world. Well, you know, the United States, but just trying to figure out where I fit in. Because I never felt like I fit into this world. Like, maybe was I born in the wrong time period? No. God, if I had been born any earlier, I'd be way more miserable. But that's not the point. But like, just how I interact with the world and people and how, you know, just nothing feels quite right. And, you know, like for a while I thought, well, maybe it's just anxiety or maybe it's just depression. But everything that I kept thinking about, it's just like, why am I like this? Why am I like this? Everything kept coming back. It's probably autism, dude. And so I was just like, you know what? I became obsessed with it. And one day I was just like, you know what? I'm going to end this once and for all. I need a professional to tell me that I'm not. And then he told me that I was. And whoo, that was a depressing, but also very gratifying day all at the same time, because it's like, that's a real bummer based on what I knew about autism and people who were autistic. But then at the same time, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, all this makes sense now. I'm just living in a world that wasn't built for someone like me. Great. You know? So, before we get into this, like, I do want to take a few minutes to talk about autism, because I think it is very widely misunderstood. I think the general understanding that people have about autism is just the extreme cases of it, you know, where it's the people who are chewing on Legos or like completely nonverbal, who just have this dead-eyed drool on their face, just completely helpless, right? And that's part of it, but it is a spectrum disorder. And it turns out I got it because of the vaccines. Jenny McCarthy was right. I can't say that with a straight face. It was not the vaccines. Vaccines do not cause autism. All right. I will explain what scientists think causes autism here in a second, but it wasn't the vaccines. All right. Vaccines do not cause autism. That's stupid. And here's the thing, man, like, even if the vaccines caused autism, like, I would rather have autism over the diseases I would get for not being vaccinated, right? Like, oh, you want to have your neck swell up like you're slowly turning into Jonah Hill before he got oddly fit for some reason? Or do you just want to be uncomfortable around practically every person ever? Like, yeah, I don't want to look like Jonah Hill. I'm just going to be uncomfortable, you know? Or like, oh, would you prefer having your legs slowly turn into wet noodles? Or would you just like to take extreme interest in something dorky like NASCAR? Man, like, raise hell, praise Dale. All right. It's fine. Technically I have, what is formerly known as Asperger's. But we can't call it that anymore. Thanks to the libs. The SJ Dubs got bored and decided to go after one of the groups that they actually fight really hard to pander to and protect. And so they got Asperger canceled, and not because it was called Asperger and people could kind of make fun of that. No, they went out and they canceled Dr. Hans Asperger, got his name removed from the DSM, and basically got his stuff lumped into the very broad autism spectrum, which is not helpful at all. Basically, like, the reason he got canceled is because Dr. Asperger was a German psychiatrist in the 1930s, which, being anything German in the 1930s, not great. All right. And so basically he's got a bunch of little weirdos running around. He was studying them. You know, is that so interesting how they get angry when I change their routines? Oh, they can't eat onions because the soft crunch causes them to vomit. It has nothing to do with the flavor. Yeah, like he was doing that stuff. And like one day, the Nazis showed up and were basically like, hey, buddy, you've got two options. One, we take all your little weird kids, put them in concentration camps, and do our own experiments on them. Or two, we will kill you, and then we'll take those kids and do our experiments anyway. And so because Dr. Asperger apparently enjoyed living, which, what is that like? He let the Nazis take his patients. There's no evidence to suggest that Asperger was a Nazi himself, but because he wasn't a martyr for autistic kids, we got to cancel him. Like, nope, you let the Nazis do a thing, you're out, buddy. You suck. I don't know. Just side note on the whole cancel culture. Like, it's so easy to cancel people, even though people aren't necessarily the problem. Like, it's just one individual. Canceling one individual doesn't solve the problem, right? Like, we need to cancel the issue at large. You know, we need to cancel trains because trains took the people to the concentration camps. Because we can't cancel trains because how else are the libs supposed to get around New York and all the other big metro areas, right? And how would Europe travel anywhere? Got to have trains, right? Can't cancel planes because of 9/11. We got to go on vacation, you guys. Like, we got a global economy to connect. We need planes, all right? But for some reason, libs want to cancel guns. So, like, we're picking and choosing the items here. I don't know. I just don't understand it, you know? Libs don't have a use for guns, so no one else should be allowed to use them. But, God, we need trains and planes, even though those killed just as many people as guns have. I don't know. This is my autism. I'm poking holes and seeing patterns that don't make sense, right? Anyway, so what actually is autism? Like, no one really knows for sure. You know, psychiatrists basically just kind of got to a point where they were like, oh, these people are different and weird. There must be something wrong with them. Neuroscientists and psychiatrists today are kind of finding. There was one study that came out that found that people on the autism spectrum actually have more synapses, like brain connections, than neurotypical brains. And basically they've surmised that it has something to do with a lack of pruning that the brain fails to do early on in development that just keeps those connections around. So basically, like, babies, probably when they're taking naps, as they should, or toddlers, or whatever the case is, right? Like, their brains go through this pruning process, kind of like how you would prune trees or bushes to get rid of excess limbs so that the tree can grow upward and stronger, right? People on autism spectrum, their brains don't do that. So, you know, in very simple terms, autistic people literally, like, feel and experience more life than neurotypical people, which on the surface sounds incredible and something that you are probably thinking, wow, I'm pretty jealous of that. I would love to experience more life, but don't. It sucks. All right. Have you lived life lately? It's a dumpster fire out there. Like, you're not missing out. You know, most of you are listening. If you're listening to this and you're not on the autism spectrum, you have the right amount of feels, unlike people like me, right? Because it's not that, like, I see colors more vibrantly or, you know, taste food more boldly. Like, no, it's all of the unnecessary trash that just makes life. Like, for example, if I don't put my socks on the right way and that little seam gets, like, right up under my toenails, it will drive me insane. All right. I don't like wearing pants, like jeans, because that connection point right under your ball sack where the inseams connect, like, if that goes up in and starts, like, you know, nudging my gooch a little bit, it's infuriating. And that's the only thing I can think about because it's the only thing I feel, All right. Like I season my food in such a way that make black people proud. All right. I have an honorary card because of how much I season my food, but it's just so that I can taste it, you know? Otherwise, everything else just tastes like cardboard. All right. It's oh God. Like, and here's what makes it more frustrating for a lot of people, right? Like it's not necessarily like Down syndrome or like a cleft palate, you know, or like something where it's like pretty universally the same for everybody. Like autistic people are like fingerprints, man. Like no one experiences it the exact same way. And there are a ton of ways to experience autism. I compare it to like a big vegetable stew, right? Like you can make a vegetable stew in a ton of different ways, but you generally need a ton of ingredients, right? You need broth, salt, pepper, garlic, onions, carrots, potatoes, maybe a couple of different kinds of beans, a few other things, right? And all of those things on their own could be any number of other things, right? Like onions can be in spaghetti. Onions can be in French onion soup. Onions can be in vegetable stew, right? Carrots can also be a cake, you know? But having carrots by themselves doesn't mean you have a whole vegetable stew, right? So maybe you, listener, maybe you just have garlic. And because of your garlic, you maybe struggle with small talk or navigating conversations in small groups, but that's it. And that's all you have, you know? And maybe you got some other ingredients that can help you make something else, but you ain't got a veggie stew, dog. All right. You know, maybe you, other listener, maybe you got potatoes and beef broth, and that broth, you know, maybe means you take things too literally, and maybe the potatoes are you having difficulty regulating body temperature, but you can make other stuff with broth and potatoes, but not a whole entire vegetable stew. All right. Me, on the other hand, I got the broth. All right. I got the salt. I got the pepper. I definitely got some garlic, but I do garlic powder and onion powder because I can't do whole onions on account of my issues with certain textures. You get it. Hang on, guys. I also have tomato sauce because of those aforementioned texture issues where the simple act of biting down on a cooked tomato where it's like half crunchy when you start, but then it gets soft, I involuntarily gag every single time. Oh, God. I also got the carrots. I got the potatoes. I got some lima beans. And when you put all of that together, I got the veggie stew, dog. And that's autism, right? And it's exhausting. And I need a lot of alone time. And it sucks because I don't want to make that inconvenience everybody. But it is what it is. And so, anyway, I've spent enough time talking about that. We got 3 stories today. Thanks for sticking with me on that long tangent. 3 stories today of just some other people who were definitely more like me than I'm comfortable admitting. We got the stories of John Murray Spear, Emperor Norton, and our first story will be of Timothy Dexter. Story time. Story time. Story time? Story time. Timothy Dexter was born on January 22nd, 1747 in Malden, Massachusetts. He dropped out of school at 8 years old to work on a farm and help provide for his family. And then at 16, he became a tanner's apprentice before moving to Newburyport and marrying 32-year-old Elizabeth Frothingham, who at the time was a very wealthy widow. When the Revolutionary War ended in 1783, Dexter used, the wealth that he'd basically married into to purchase a ton of worthless continental currency. Although people in his social circle thought he was an idiot for purchasing this outdated currency, the U.S. government had actually promised to redeem those old notes at 1% of their face value, while Massachusetts had actually promised to pay it at face value. And this difference actually allowed Dexter to make a huge profit on these notes, which then allowed him to build 2 entire giant ships to start an export business to Europe and the Caribbean. And because Dexter was far less educated than other export business owners, I guess, his business practices were often doubted and heavily mocked. Others tried to take advantage of this perceived lack of business acumen, which actually, crazily enough, ended up backfiring. On one occasion, Dexter was advised to send warming pans to the Caribbean. Although these pans were normally used to heat beds in the cold New England winters, the pans were actually flipped as ladles to the local molasses industry and turned a huge profit for Dexter, right? So basically they're like, hey, Dexter, why don't you take these warming pans and sell them to the Caribbean, right? And these pans, right? Like, I don't know what they are, but basically they were used to warm up beds in New England in the winter, which is crazy cold, and you send it to a tropical island which has enough heat. Don't need it. But then they used it for something completely different, right? Later, Dexter was told to send wool mittens to the Caribbean, with no one thinking anyone would be interested in those. And again, why would they? It's the tropics. They don't need mittens. It doesn't get cold enough for that. Well, Asian merchants who were already working down there quickly snatched those up and resold them to Siberia. On another occasion, people jokingly told him to send coal to Newcastle, England, which, hilarious back in the day, but none of you have any idea why that's relevant. Newcastle has a ton of coal. It is a coal city. It'd basically be the equivalent of telling someone to sell oil to Saudi Arabia today. Dexter, however, didn't care about any of that and did it anyway. Coincidentally, he ended up selling it during a miners' strike, and the coal was sold at premium prices. So dude just keeps winning. It gets super lucky, honestly. When another group of people looking to bankrupt Dexter told him to ship gloves to the South Sea Islands in the Pacific, Dexter did it. The gloves were then purchased by the Portuguese, who then resold them to China. He then sent Bibles and stray cats to the Caribbean, which were both quickly snatched up by missionaries to combat the unsaved and deal with a growing rat problem on the islands. He amassed a huge inventory of whale bones by mistake at some point, but then later profited off of them by selling them as corset stays, which, again, crazy, like, kind of semi-historical connection there. So, like, corsets back in the day, rather than, like, actual, like, ribbon ties or fabric ties or whatever, like, they used to use whale bones to, make them tight, right? And there was one story from history, I'm pretty sure we've covered it already. Governor Morris, Governor was his first name, he actually had, like, a urinary blockage, and so he took a whale bone out of his wife's corset and jammed it in his wiener to fix the blockage. It killed him. Obviously, you don't want to jam a whale bone up your wiener, but just interesting little historical nuggets right there. At this point, Dexter has made so much money, even though he absolutely shouldn't have. Like, he's just gotten so lucky. He bought a mansion in Newburyport, Massachusetts, and decorated the front lawn with 40 wooden statues of various famous men, including George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Napoleon Bonaparte. He even had a statue of himself erected and have it inscribed, "I am the first in the East, the first in the West, and the greatest philosopher in the Western world." He really thought a lot of himself, which probably shouldn't have. Most of these statues, though, were later destroyed by various storms that came through. In 1797, Dexter published his book, A Pickle for the Knowing Ones, which contained his complaints about politicians, the church, and his wife. Despite random capitalizations and not a single punctuation mark to be found in the entire book, the book became popular in the area and was reprinted 8 different times. In 1805, Dexter published a second edition of his book in response to the lack of punctuation by just adding 11 extra lines of random punctuation marks with instructions for the printers to let the readers insert the marks wherever they wanted, which is, that's just a dick move that I can appreciate. I love that sarcasm. Despite Dexter's shocking and baffling success, his personal life wasn't actually going as well. His relationship with his wife deteriorated to the point that he began telling people she had died, even though she was still very much alive. And I can't believe that a guy who wrote a book complaining about his wife had a hard time maintaining his marriage. I've written a bunch of books. All right. I am working on books 29 and 30. And maybe at this point I've already published them. I don't know. I'm obviously recording ahead, but like, I can't imagine that if one of the books I wrote was just full of complaints about my wife, that she would be super happy about that. We'd probably be having some issues. All right. At 100% would be in marriage counseling for sure. Probably may not even survive that. Right. Because now I just have this entire book of complaints out there about her. And, you know, how now that she, you know, now she looks like a terrible person and has no way of defending herself. Right. Yeah. Anyway, so Dexter, he's telling people his wife is dead. She's not. And when people called him out on it by pointing out the fact that everyone kept seeing her enter and leave the house on a daily basis, Dexter just claimed that they were seeing her ghost. In 1806, Dexter actually faked his own death just to see how people would react. Nearly 3,000 people actually attended the wake, including Dexter himself. However, when he saw that his wife didn't seem sad about it at all, he revealed the hoax and began beating her with his cane. Dude fakes his own death. And like, just out of curiosity to see like how many people would care. 3,000 people cared. But his wife probably pretty happy about all of it. Laughing, ha ha ha. And then he reveals himself. Ha! I am not dead. Bash, bash, Anyway, he died a few weeks later, though, for real, on October 23rd, 1806. Our next story here is of John Murray Spear, who was born in Boston on September 16th, 1804. He spent almost all of his childhood in the Universalist Church of America under Hosea Ballou, who believed that hell wasn't real at all, which, despite modern scholars now agreeing with that sentiment, was seen as total blasphemy during that time. By 1830, Spear was leading his own congregation and became an activist for women's rights and abolishing the death penalty, which was also seen as blasphemy during that time. So liberal. No death penalty? Women having rights? Gross. He also organized an anti-slavery convention and oversaw the portion of the Underground Railroad that ran through Boston. Of course, being super sympathetic to blacks and women earned Spear a ton of enemies, mainly because Boston is also just a trashy place. In 1844, Spear had his head bashed by an angry mob, which actually sent him into a month-long coma. And while he's in his coma, Spear claimed to meet, quote, the Association of Electrizers, which included Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and John Quincy Adams. And according to Spear, the group wanted to help the living invent new technology so that greater levels of personal and spiritual freedom could be achieved. In 1852, after, once he was out of his coma, fully made a recovery, whatever, he severed all ties with the Universalist Church and fully embraced spiritualism, which is the belief that, basically ghosts were everywhere and were happy to help the living continue to learn about moral and ethical issues as well as the nature of God, right? This made complete sense, considering Spear had been talking to the ghost of Benjamin Franklin and others for almost a decade at this point. Even more, the spiritualists were much more accepting of his views on slaves and women's rights, because all Spear had to do was be like, hey guys, I was talking to the ghost of Benjamin Franklin, and he said slavery is actually bad. Benji, he was actually talking to George Washington, a couple of the others, and they felt really bad for having slaves. And they were like, you know what? It shouldn't be a thing anymore. And also while you're at it, women, they're kind of equal to you. And I couldn't believe it, guys. Like Benjamin Franklin saying that women were equal to us. I was like, Benji, bro, are you sure? And he's like, yeah, man. Yeah, dog. Women are equal. So, the ghosts, the ghosts have spoken, guys. Like we should really work to make this happen. The next year in 1853, Spear and a few of his followers met inside a wooden shed in Lynn, Massachusetts, where they began working on new motive power, which was basically this robot Jesus that they believed would usher in a new area of utopia. This robot Jesus was made of copper, zinc, and magnets attached to an old dining room table. And so basically this was like Frankenstein out of machinery and metal, right? And as if that wasn't weird enough, after 9 months of working on this, Spear recruited a woman named Sarah Newton that he renamed New Mary, and the two ritualistically gave birth to Robot Jesus as a way to give it life, as opposed to, I don't know, just plugging it into a power source. Unfortunately, the ritual birthing did not give life to Robot Jesus, and the group was forced to tear down the machine. I don't know, they just put all of these like magnetic metallic materials, magnetic metals, and like, electric conducive materials. You get what I'm trying to say, right? And they just kind of expected it to just work on its own without having a power source. And then, God, I wish I'd have been there. I wish I could have been there for that birthing ceremony just to see how crazy it was. To think that just, I don't know, like, did New Mary like squat over Robot Jesus and like pretend to like push him out of her? I don't know. He was like, Robot Jesus was laying on this dining room table, right? So was New Mary then like propped up, at one end of the table, and then Spears at the other end, and he's just like looking back at her, just like, come on, New Mary, push, and he just grabbing this metal Robot Jesus and pulling him. Anyway, none of it worked. And unfortunately, because of that, the group kind of stopped taking him seriously. He continued his spiritual work, but the Association of Electrizers, his robot ghost, or his ghost, his presidential ghosts, eventually convinced him to retire in 1872. That one may be more brain damage than autism, if I'm being honest. All right. Anyway, our last story here is of Joshua Abraham Norton, who was born on February 4th, 1818 in London. When he was 2 years old, his family then moved down to South Africa as part of a British colonization plan. And then somehow, we're not entirely sure how, he then arrived in San Francisco on November 23rd, 1849, with money from his father's estate to build a new life for himself. So obviously his family, he grows up in South Africa, family dies, he inherits their estate, and he just immigrates to the United States. Within 3 years, Norton was one of the wealthiest, most respected men in San Francisco after having made several strategic investments that really worked out for him along the way. I almost threw up there for a second. Here's the thing, guys. I accidentally ate 2 peanut butter chocolate chip cookies yesterday, and I am allergic to peanuts, all right? I did not know that they were peanut butter chocolate chip cookies. Like, there wasn't a ton of peanut butter in them. Like, it had a hint of it. Like, I ate the first one, didn't taste any at all. Ate the second one, started to taste it a little bit, and I thought, oh, man, the cookies that were on the tray beside it looked like they had, like, some peanut butter on them, and maybe, they were sitting in the car, it kind of melted a little bit, kind of got on there. So I thought it was just a little bit. No, it turns out 2 whole peanut butter chocolate chip cookies. And I was going through it yesterday. Just felt terrible. Still kind of feeling it this morning. Anyway, that's beside the point. All of Emperor Norton's success, well, he's not Emperor Norton yet, but Norton, all of his success came to a crashing halt when in December 1852, China banned all exports of their rice so they could have enough food to get them through the famine they were currently experiencing. The ban caused the price of rice in San Francisco to go from 4 cents per pound to 36 cents per pound. So like a 900% increase. I think that's how that math works. Norton, however, seeing a great business opportunity, bought an entire shipment of Peruvian rice for $25,000 in hopes of controlling the market. However, when several other unexpected shipments of Peruvian rice arrived in San Francisco, the price of rice dropped back down to just 3 cents per pound. So now the supply has been more than what they were getting from China. And so now rice was actually cheaper per pound than what it used to be. Norton saw this. He tried to void his initial payment on the grounds that he had been misled about the quality of the rice. And he spent the next 3 years in various court cases before the California Supreme Court ruled against him. By 1858, Norton had lost almost all of his real estate holdings and was forced to file for bankruptcy. In 1859, Norton had become completely disaffected toward the United States government and believed that every elected official and bureaucratic system was completely inept and detrimental to the common citizen. Seeing no other reasonable option, he decided to declare himself Emperor of the United States on September 17th, which wasn't a real thing at all. He distributed letters to newspapers all around San Francisco claiming that a majority of the country's citizens had requested that he become the emperor. No one had. He then called for representatives from all states to meet in Musical Hall in San Francisco on February 1st, 1860, to alter the previously existing laws in the country and finally fix all of its problems. A month later, he issued a decree to formally abolish Congress and later summoned the army to depose all elected officials in Congress. Obviously, no one in the actual government took him seriously, even after Norton issued subsequent decrees outlawing the assembly of any members of Congress. Like, this dude, he's just like lost his mind, right? He is just like, he was already pretty crazy to begin with. And now, he's lost everything and he's just like, you know what? Let's abolish Congress. I'm going to send letters to every governor and state senator to come meet me and let's go abolish Congress. I'm even going to call the army because I'm the emperor. I control everything, not the president and the actual government. Me, the emperor, self-proclaimed emperor that everyone wanted me to be, even though no one said it, they believed it. Anyway, you get it. In 1862, Norton ordered the Roman Catholic Church and all Protestant churches to come together to publicly ordain him as emperor as a way to resolve most of the issues that led to the Civil War. Again, everyone ignored him on this. In 1869, Norton declared that Democrat and Republican parties had been abolished. He also declared that anyone who called San Francisco just Frisco would be issued a high misdemeanor and pay a $25 fine. No, it's not Frisco. It's San Francisco. If we just shorten everything, then what's the point of living? It's not Frisco. What are we, some cool hippies now? It's San Francisco. Frisco. Anyway. He also began issuing his own currency, which was actually accepted by several restaurants around the city, even though still no one was really taking all of his decrees seriously. But they played along anyway because it's fun. It's San Francisco. We're all liberal and open-minded here. If this guy thinks he's the emperor, let's humor him. What's the worst that could happen? Surviving notes of this of Emperor Norton's currency now sell as collector's items for more than $10,000, by the way. You can find these, and if you want a piece of this history, go get it. In brief moments of actual, lucid logic, Norton provided instructions for an early version of the League of Nations, which would become the United Nations, as well as the early ideas of construction of what would eventually become the Bay Bridge connecting Oakland and San Francisco. When he wasn't issuing decrees, Emperor Norton spent his days inspecting San Francisco streets wearing a blue uniform with gold tassels on the shoulders that had been given to him by army officers. He also wore a beaver skin hat with a peacock feather and walked with either a cane or an umbrella. If he wasn't inspecting the pavement or cable car conditions, he was making sure police officers were properly dressed. He also went on long philosophical tangents on a variety of topics, even if no one in particular was listening. In 1867, a member of a private police force arrested Norton in an attempt to commit him to a hospital to treat his very obvious mental disorder. However, the arrest outraged the city, leading to his later release. In response, Norton then granted an imperial pardon to the arresting officer, which I'm sure the officer was very, very proud of. Norton also made several attempts to establish relationships with foreign leaders. He contacted several different countries in hopes of being recognized as the true representative of the United States, but rarely received any response. The only world leader that ever recognized Emperor Norton as the sole leader of the United States was King Kamehameha V of Hawaii. And we see how that turned out. Hawaii later just became a state. What if that was why? Like, what if that's why Hawaii became a state? Like, secretly. Like, it obviously became a state because of, like, the things that happened, shortly after World War II, right? But, like, what if secretly Hawaii was just like, yeah, Emperor Norton, he's the leader of the United States. We'll just do what he says. And then, what would Emperor Norton do? Well, he'd probably just tell us to join the United States. All right, well, I think we could still recognize him. He's dead at this point. Spoiler alert. But, like, it's the 1940s. I think let's just go be part of the... Anyway, I don't know. On January 8th, 1880, while on his way to give a lecture at the California Academy of Sciences, Emperor Norton collapsed in front of Old St. Mary's Cathedral. A police officer on his beat immediately noticed Norton lying on the ground and called for help. However, Norton died before the ambulance carriage could arrive. Despite being extremely wealthy before Emperor Norton died with less than $10 to his name, along with a collection of odd possessions, including fake letters from world leaders discussing his fake marriage to Queen Victoria. That was a side quest that he was on that didn't pan out, apparently. Although it was initially planned to bury him in a pauper's coffin, local businessmen established a funeral fund that raised enough money to give Emperor Norton a dignified funeral that was attended by as many as 10,000 people. Like, this dude was a big celebrity in San Francisco. Norton was actually so famous during his time that the king in Adventures of Huckleberry Finn was modeled after him. So famous, Mark Twain modeled Emperor Norton's character after King in Huckleberry Finn. Norton is also a character in Robert Louis Stevenson's novel, The Wrecker. In 2004 and 2013, local government officials drafted resolutions to rename the Bay Bridge to the Emperor Norton Bridge. So far, nothing official has happened, but the Emperor Norton Trust was established with the goal of having the bridge officially renamed. It still comes up every couple of years, but just hasn't been done quite yet. There we go. 3 wonderful weirdos from history, plus a lot more information about autism than you were probably prepared to listen to today. But I think it's a really good episode. I'm pretty proud of it. So let's recap and see what we learned today.
What did we learn?
Number 1, autism, a spectrum disorder. You could either be like super, super disabled by it, or you could just be like me, who just walks around mildly inconvenienced all of the time, and it's exhausting. Number 2, Timothy Dexter got super lucky on a bunch of trades and investments that should have never worked. He sold coal to a coal city. He sold bed warmers to the Caribbean, mittens to the Caribbean, and they were all just huge successes, made him a ton of money. And then he just hated his wife. He really hated his wife. But also, like, without his wife, would have never been able to make that initial investment that got him to the success that he did. Anyway, just a super interesting character there. And then number 3, John Murray Spear tried to build Robot Jesus to usher humanity into a new era of utopia. Every single word of that sentence just should obviously tell you that did not work.
What did we learn?
Next week on Our Weird World, we are talking about disrespecting the dead. 4 stories of times where people went to graveyards and were like, who cares? So, like, that's all I can really tell you about this episode. It's going to get dark and kind of gross. So get ready for that. We're looking at the stories of Anatoly Moskvin and David Sconce, as well as something that happened at Congress Park in Denver, Colorado, and the Tri-State Crematory in Georgia. It's shocking, it's kind of sad, but also just like morbidly interesting. So get ready for that. Thank you so much for continuing to listen. Keep telling all your friends and keep it weird.
This is a podcast.